Thank you everybody for coming. This is great. This is, I wish we were here for a better reason. We've done outreaches like this in the past to simply update everybody on what was going on with the flood program, which we will be talking about a little bit tonight. And when we started doing these planning outreaches like this one and the ones that we're doing across the state over the next month or so, the thrust originally was to inform people about the flood insurance program and program changes. Then March happened. And many of you are here tonight because of the extreme damage that has happened to your homes or knowing somebody that has had damage happen to your property. So tonight we're going to be talking about a little bit of everything when it comes to damage, when it comes to what to do next, where to go, resources available, and more. So by the end of tonight, the great thing about tonight is, so what we decided to do was, because there's so much to talk about, we know we're not going to cover everything in the short time we have for actual presentations. So during the presentation, if something isn't touched on, we will have an expert panel here, and we have several people in the room, both from state agencies, the town of Marshfield, and our board of directors, who will be here at the front of the room to answer questions, and we'll try to keep them high level from a expert panel perspective, because after the expert panel we will move to resource stations, and the tables in the back have resources that are available to you, both individuals who will be back at those tables and around the room for you to take more individualized questions to get answers to those questions. So bear with us throughout the program today. We know how many questions there are out there, and we'll be working really hard to try to get to everybody's questions about what to do after the storm. But first thing I want to do is introduce the Coalition's Board of Directors. Anyone here who follows the Marshfield, now Massachusetts Coastal Coalition, knows that we're going through a transition. We want to thank everybody for now 6 years of support as we have worked our way across the east coast of Mass and now across the country to assist people in coastal and basically all flood issues. So we have a mixture of material that has both our Marshfield logo and now our Massachusetts logo as we begin to rebrand to go statewide and pick up some steam at a national level as well. So most of our board of directors is here, and I'm going to ask that you either stand or raise your hand when I call you out. Our vice chair, well, I should start with myself as chair. My name is Joe Rossi. I'm chair and executive director of the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition. Our vice chair is at another event, may show up later, Tim Williams, so he will be here probably later. Our treasurer is Steve Amico. Thank you, Steve. And our clerk is Doris Crary, who welcomed you on the way in, so thank you, Doris. We have our directors at the front, which is Tim Carty. Thank you, Tim. And Sue Sullivan. And I'd just like to say that each member of our board of directors is an expert in their own field. And so Sue is real estate, Steve with lending, Tim with insurance, and Doris with everything. So, so thank you, Doris, for being in the back. More specifically, Doris, we honored Doris about 2 years ago exactly for her 25 years of service to the National Flood Insurance Program. Doris at one point had the town of Marshfield at a 20% discount with the community rating system. And I'm proud to say that with the help of the town of Marshfield, a CRS committee has been formed, and Doris is once again on that committee. So let's work towards getting back to where we were, and thank you, Doris, for all your service. So right into the presentation. I'm going to be brief. We might move through these slides a little quick. The good news is these slides will all be on our website by the end of today, so that tomorrow, if you didn't get everything here in these slides, you'll be able to download them directly from our website. So today, in this presentation, and then we're going to shift over to Brian Baer, who is the executive director of the Elevated Studio. They are going to talk about elevating homes and what you need to do to potentially elevate your home, which is a really new partnership and resource that we wanted to bring to these outreaches because that's really what a lot of people are looking to do now is what do I do, how do I elevate my home, and so thank you, Brian will be up here when I'm done to talk a little bit about that. So in today's discussion, we're going to be talking about the flood policy, increased cost of compliance coverage, substantial damage, assistance. That's been the big question. Is there assistance available? Unfortunately, we have not yet gotten a presidentially declared disaster for our storms this winter, which means that there is little to no assistance available from the federal level. But we will talk about potential assistance that you'll be able to receive by your individual communities. And then program changes. Everyone have a flood insurance policy. Everyone was affected April 1st by flood program changes. And I noticed, I think we had a question on the front here. We'll take some questions. I'd like to save them to the end, but I'll take some of them. Yes. Sure.
Does that mean, is there like, do you think he could declare it, or is that time over?
So Eric Carlson is here from DCR. I don't know, Eric, if you can answer that question. Are there still state assessment teams going around looking to try to get a presidentially declared disaster?
I'm not aware if they're still going around, but I know they're still working on that issue.
Okay, great. So there is a chance that we could still be moving that direction, so thank you. And yes,
What
sir.
do they consider a disaster?
Well, it has to be a certain dollar threshold per county for the damage that was done, and I'm not sure what that dollar is. Eric, are you?
I don't know.
Okay, Eric's unaware too. So we'll get that information because we know that the assessment teams are trying to add up that dollars of damage. It's per county, and then it's added together, and if we make the dollar threshold, then we get a disaster declaration. And we just want to let everyone know too, our mission statement, which has recently changed by a vote of the board of directors of the coalition, our job is to, our mission of the MCC is to educate, advocate, and inform professionals and stakeholders regionally and nationally on all flood hazards. So this is certainly meeting our mission. So claims, one of the big things we want to talk about is those that have filed claims. And one of the things that we get questions about all the time is, will a claim affect my premium, my policy, my situation within the National Flood Insurance Program? Let me just get a pulse from the audience here. How many people here have or are thinking about potentially purchasing a flood insurance policy? Okay, great. Okay, so we're talking to a lot of the people in the room, and if you don't have a flood policy, but you're maybe thinking about getting one, or you got rid of yours recently, this is all very relevant for you. So a repetitive loss. A structure is a repetitive loss if it has had 2 flood losses of more than $1,000 each in any 10-year period. This only matters for grant programs. This does not matter. FEMA does not track repetitive losses for the flood insurance program. So your premium will not be impacted by becoming a repetitive loss property. Okay? So we wanted to make sure we clarified that. And all this information, when we're done here, there's resource guidance on the coalition's table in the back with this information on it. So why do you care if you become a repetitive loss? Well, because the next step is a severe repetitive loss. This is when it matters. This is when there are potential premium implications for your flood insurance policy. So this is a little cumbersome, and so we're going to try to break it down. 4 or more separate claims that have been made with each amount exceeding $5,000, with a cumulative amount being exceeding $20,000. Or at least 2 separate claim payments have been made with a cumulative amount of those claim payments which exceed the fair market value of the insured building, right? So think about huge damage for that second one. Now, what's interesting is for the flood insurance program, that 2 of those events have to happen within a 10-year period, but once 2 events happen in a 10-year period, the other 2 events can happen at any time, okay? So while this might be a little confusing, really what we're trying to get across here is know your structure's loss history. And this is important because the definitions are for the life of the structure regardless of who owns that building. And too many times what we see happen is that people are filing claims now, which are fine, but they don't understand that the previous owners have filed claims that now make them severe repetitive loss structures. So knowing this definition and understanding that this follows the life of your building from 1978 on, that is the most important part. So it's a little hard to understand this concept without looking at your own individualized loss history. So really what we want to make sure you know is understand your building's loss history. So, how many people have actually ever seen the cover to a full flood insurance policy? This is it, nothing exciting, okay? It's the dwelling form, that will apply to most of the people in this room. This is for 1 to 4 family buildings. The actual flood insurance policy, if anybody's ever read it, I'm sad to say I have several times, is actually about 35 pages or so. In that policy, it very clearly details what is and is not covered under the flood insurance policy, and we've gotten a lot of questions about this as well. So I'm not going to go through reading all of these. Again, this information will all be available on our website afterwards. You can go through and understand what is covered and isn't covered. It's also in the full flood insurance policy. But the important thing to note here is the limitations of coverage, right? So we see here that there's coverage. What is covered? So the building, electrical system, central air conditioning, refrigerators. You can go through here and kind of see what is covered. But there's limited coverage when it comes to an enclosure or basement. And this is what we have more of a problem with here in New England than we do in any other part of the country. I was just speaking at a flood conference out in Arizona a couple weeks ago while everyone here was getting snow. And the great thing about being out there and speaking at that conference was I was able to give the perspective of New England homeowners to other parts of the country, right, where most of the buildings are slab. So they don't have the type of limitations of coverage for those buildings that we do up here. So what is insured under the building property coverage? There are 17 building items and 3 contents coverage items covered in a basement. Now, while you can go ahead and see the 17 items, I don't know if all 17 are listed here for building coverage, I want to focus for a second on the contents coverage. How many people here have their washer or dryer in their basement? Okay, we have a few people raising their hand. Washers and dryers are not covered under your building coverage, but they are covered in a basement under your contents coverage. So it's worth having your flood policy have $10,000, $15,000 of contents coverage for that reason, if you have a washer and dryer in that basement. Because you want to have some coverage, and you want to make sure that coverage exceeds your deductible. All right, so that's really the thrust here on this slide, is to really make sure you understand the limitations of coverage in a basement. Now this also counts for newer buildings that are recently built within the last 30 years or so. The same limitations apply to attached garages. So if you have a lot of contents items in your garage, then you have very limited coverage there. Those are for newer buildings within the last 30 years or so in most communities. Now, things that never have coverage, right? We get these questions a lot too. What do you just don't have coverage for? Living expenses, that's so we don't have any type of loss of use or rental expense coverage under the National Flood Insurance. Some private policies do have that coverage. Damage caused, and I want to focus on the first bullet, damage caused by moisture, mildew, or mold that could have been avoided by the property owner. And this is important, because how many people that we know, or maybe some people in here, have their buildings were damaged or second homes. And you might have been away during the storm in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, now it's been 4 weeks and you haven't been back yet to really assess the damage, or you were told there wasn't a lot of damage, but you come home and there's flood damage. Now, mold and mildew itself isn't covered, but the prevention of mold and mildew is covered under the flood policy. And you have limitations in that coverage. If you didn't secure the building, I talked to an adjuster, he gives you 4 weeks to get back to secure that building before he eliminates that as a coverage. So what we like to try to tell people is this is an exclusion in the policy if you do not do your due diligence to try to secure your building from flooding again after the storm or continued damage. So that's something that's very important. Decks are not covered under the flood program. 16 square feet are, I take that back, 16 square feet are, and they use that square footage as entry space, right? So assume a little deck going into the building. That is what is covered under the flood policy. So seawalls, hot tubs, and swimming pools and those equipments for the swimming pools are not covered. I talked to an adjuster recently, and he had an interesting situation in New Jersey. He had a building that had a monolithic foundation, meaning the basement connected directly to the seawall. Now, I don't know why you would ever build a building that way, but that's how the building was built. And because the seawall was part of the foundation of the building, he gave him coverage for the damaged seawall. So while we say seawalls, there are ways around that, but we would never design a building today with a seawall connected to a foundation. I just wanted to pull that out because there are nuances within the flood policy that you really have to understand in order to really know your coverages. So we just wanted to make sure we gave you kind of a high-level understanding of some of the ins and outs of coverages on the flood policy. Now, claims. So this is a big part of what everyone is here for. So what do you do in a claim? So what do? You just had a major loss. Well, I'm hoping everybody here has already started the process of getting their insurance agent involved and an adjuster out to your property. But going forward, we just want to make sure that you understand the entire process, and this is important as how it relates to ICC coverage, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So the damage occurs, and this is very high level. You file a claim with your agent. You want to immediately go to your agent. There's 60 days between the date of loss and when you have to have your proof of loss submitted. And so you're going to want to have that process start. Most adjusters can complete the loss claim process in 45 days. Fine, you start on day one, maybe even a week after, and you'll be okay. But if you wait 30 days, you might run into a problem. So you file a claim with the agent. The adjuster does something called scoping the loss. They come out, and that's when the adjuster takes pictures and measures your building, as I'm sure some people in here have had done. There may be an advance claim available. Always ask your adjuster if they can give you an advance on your claim. And sometimes it's upwards of 30% of your final adjusted loss. They'll actually go ahead and say, well, we're going to give you, based on my estimate, and it takes them about a week to put the estimate together, based on the estimate, I can send you 30% of your loss ahead of time. Ask them about that. Not all the time, but a lot of the time they can do that. And the adjuster sends you an estimate and a proof of loss. You have to have that signed and submitted to the company within 60 days of the date of your loss. Now, why does this process matter so much? A lot of people here may have already gone through that process. Because it relates directly to increased cost of compliance. This is a little nuance that's inside every single flood insurance policy except if you have a condo policy. The condo, not the association, but the unit owner's policy does not have this coverage. Increased cost of compliance, or ICC. What is ICC? It's $30,000 built into almost every single flood policy. You're paying for it whether you realized it or not. It's a very small premium. It might be $50 a year. ICC, when utilized, can only be used for elevation, demolition, moving the building, or floodproofing on non-residential buildings, and it cannot exceed the maximum policy value. You have a $250,000 policy, you can't go above that in ICC, so you would be capped and ICC would be unavailable. ICC can only be used for flood damage. We like to usually, and Tim Carty can talk a little bit about this since I think he's going to be either in the back of the room or at our expert panel as an agent. He can talk about how if you have a homeowner's policy, you can increase something called ordinance and law, because say you have a home in a flood zone, that house burns down. ICC cannot be used, but your homeowner's policy can give you coverage under ordinance and law because you're still going to be required to elevate that home. So to get ICC, that $30,000, if you're eligible for it, and we're going to talk about eligibility in just a second, you go through your regular claims process, your community issues you a substantial damage letter, the claim is filed, and a second proof of loss is then filed, and there's no 60-day timeline here. Work begins with payments. You're paid, I think FEMA has authorized a 50% payment plan For smaller ICC claims, I think now it's about a third. They do them in thirds. So you do the work, you get a third. You do a work, you get a third. And the work has to be completed within 6 years. Now, if you read the flood insurance policy, it says 2 years. But FEMA has changed that through some administrative changes that don't reflect in the policy. It's a 6-year process. Now, substantial damage. This is really important because this is how you become eligible for ICC. Substantial improvement and substantial damage is essentially the same thing. First, you have to be substantially damaged, which means damage by any origin. Remember, we talked about the home burning down, you're still substantially damaged in that case, whereby the cost of restoring the structure to its before damaged condition would equal or exceed 50% of the market value of the structure before the damage occurred. Now that's substantial damage. So then to be substantially improved, you obviously have to fix the building, which would also cross that 50% threshold. So it's called SISD. So when we talk about SISD, that means you've been substantially damaged and now you have to improve the building back to its pre-damaged condition. So to be declared substantially damaged, and we have Marshfield Town Planner, who will probably kill me from calling him out here in the room. We have Greg Guimont sitting here in the room. It would actually not be Greg's job, it would be the town building department's job to declare a building substantially damaged. This is critical. You cannot get ICC without the town issuing you a substantial damage letter. So if you want your ICC, you want to have the town write you a substantially damaged letter. Here's the process to be declared substantially damaged. The damage is done. The adjuster does not decide if you're substantially damaged. That is left up. The adjuster will send the estimated claim damage through what's called a damage assessment to the community as a guide to show that you are either at or near substantial damage. The permit is applied for by the resident, the community requests detailed estimate of the work to be done, and your SISD determination is made. Now this is a guide, it's not always done exactly in this process. Again, it's up to the community is the one that is issuing these letters. So only a community official can issue an SISD designation. This can drastically change your NFIP flood rating because once you're declared substantially damaged, for the flood program's purpose, your date of construction is the date that letter is issued. So substantially damaging your building means that you have now changed your status within the program. So you're no longer, so if you're an older building, you're now a new building. So you're substantially damaged. While the definition uses market value, some towns use assessed value. If the town uses assessed value and you don't want to be substantially damaged, I shouldn't be saying this, you can appeal it. You can go through what's called an appeal process by getting an independent appraisal that shows that your building is appraised market value for more than what would be required for substantially damaged. Personally, I'm an advocate that if your building is declared substantially damaged by the community, you probably want to get that building elevated, and we're going to talk about that next. This can be challenged by getting an independent appraiser. The adjuster's estimate is only an indicator that the community uses, so we talked about that. So we're going to talk really quickly about some assistance that's available because we've gotten a lot of questions about what assistance can be available for homeowners. The community must apply for so the first one is the Federal Mitigation Assistance Program. The community must apply. Congress approves money each year, and Congress just approved $250 million nationally to this program. So there is funding available. Nationally competitive program. So even though a community applies, and you apply because the community applies, it doesn't mean that you'll get the grant. The application period is only about 2 months. Now the reason that I say that is because when you go to apply for an FMA grant, you're going to want to have all your required documentation ready ahead of time. And this is why it becomes a little onerous for homeowners to apply because nobody is guaranteeing the community will get the grant even after you apply. You apply for the grant, the community applies for the grant, they may or may not get it. It's a nationally competitive program. It requires some upfront cost. Engineering plans are required to apply for the FMA program. The work is paid in installments, but here's the reward. If you meet the right qualifications for a FMA applicant, you get 90 to 100% of the work paid for by the federal government. So is it worth it once you get into the FMA program? Absolutely. But it's getting there that can be a little bit of a challenge. Now, the one that we really are hoping for still is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP. This program is available only after a presidentially declared disaster. Individuals can apply, but only available after a presidential declaration. So we have no accessibility right now to HMGP. It's available for more than individual mitigation, right? Communities can apply for this HMGP grant for culverts and road repairs and that type of thing. And it's up to 75% reimbursement. So it's not the 100 to 90%, but it's still significant. And this is the great thing, ICC can be used as your contribution towards the grant. So if you are substantially damaged, you get the substantial damage letter, you get that $30,000 in ICC, and you're also going to get into the FMA or HMGP program. That 10% under FMA or 25% under HMGP could be paid for by your ICC coverage. So let's talk really quickly, and then I'll sum up with program changes. April 1st was just a few days ago. And every April 1st, premiums increase. You know, and it shocks me after we get right to April 1st and every major newspaper is publishing a story about, oh, FEMA thinks their premiums are going up 8%. We've known about these increases for 6 months. And we know about these increases because in October, FEMA publishes what their April 1st changes are going to be. And we actually know now what the October 1st changes are going to be, and we'll preview that in just a second. I'm not going to read all these. We have a table with these values on our website showing you what the average premium will go up per zone. On average, premiums will increase 8%. How many people here have an older home? That's a second home to them. Older second homes? Okay, you'll go up 25% this year. That is one of the unprotected classes within the HFIAA bill that was passed several years ago. Older second homes, older businesses, and severe repetitive loss buildings that are older go up at 25% a year. So just keep that in mind. Again, that goes back to knowing your claims history. FEMA is also updating the primary residency guidance. We probably don't have a lot of cases like this, but if you have 2 different residencies per spouse, it's like, imagine your spouse works in New York, they live down there more than 50% of the year, you stay at home, you take care of the kids, you're up here more than 50% of the year. Now you can have 2 primary residencies based on that situation. And then we're not going to talk about phase 2 of HFIAA section 28, except that how many people have gotten letters from FEMA advising them they should get an elevation certificate? Many people? Okay, we have some people. So for the rest of you that have a flood policy, all this means is starting April 1st, the rest of you will start getting those letters. So just be prepared. And those letters aren't telling you you're going to lose your rate if you don't get an elevation certificate. By law, Congress has to inform you that getting an elevation certificate may help your situation. October 1st, this is a big change. FEMA is establishing cancellation code number 26. Yes, there are 25 reasons to cancel a flood insurance policy. Several of them have been removed over the years, but they're adding number 26. And why is this important? Because it will be the first time in a long time that FEMA will allow you to cancel an NFIP policy midterm if you buy a private flood insurance policy and you want to get rid of your NFIP policy to move over to the private policy. Now, I could stand here and spend another hour talking about the reasons that you should be careful about moving to the private industry, and I'm not at all bashing the private industry. I think there's going to be a great opportunity for private flood insurance here in the future. But what I would say is that this is a good this is FEMA's olive branch to the private market saying we want to work with you, we want to do stuff with you, we want to move forward with trying to allow private market policies more into the program. So effective October 1st, 2018, FEMA is also expanding eligibility. Now this kills me. I have been advocating for these changes back when we were going through the newly mapped process several years ago. Now if Marshfield, Scituate, and Duxbury go through a remapping again, because we're adding additional data to our maps locally here and may have that opportunity, we actually may be able to access this change on October 1st. So what is it doing? Well, previously, if you were newly mapped, you had to buy a flood insurance policy within 1 year of that newly mapped date, or else you would go immediately to what your rate was without the newly mapped rate phasing. Well, now what they're doing, well, what happens is lenders, and I'm networked into a lot of big national lenders, they have a 60-day tolerance between the identification of when there's a problem to the date that they actually get a zone determination showing you've been newly mapped. Well, some of these lenders have given their entire book of business to determination companies, and it takes them a while to run them. We were having people, the deadline for the newly mapped policy in Marshfield was November 4th of this past year, November 3rd technically of 2017. But now what they're allowing you to do is within 2 years of the new maps, you can get the newly mapped policy within 45 days of your initial lender's letter notifying you that you are required to carry flood insurance. So this is great, because lenders' lack of notification sometimes cause people to not know they needed to purchase flood insurance, therefore not able to be buying the newly mapped policy. Now I'm advocating at a national level for this to change even further, but this is a great first step. So this is effective October 1st. A legislative update. I know if you're on our email list, if you signed in, you'll automatically be going on our email list and you can always opt out. But one of the things that we like to do is update everybody about the legislative changes. Yeah, sometimes we send a lot of emails out notifying you that the program is fine, and then it's not fine, and then it's fine again. Well, sorry, that's Congress's fault, not ours. But the NFIP was extended to July 31st in the recent omnibus spending bill. But what that means is the omnibus bill extends the NFIP to extends the federal government spending to September 30th. So what it's doing is decoupling government spending with the National Flood Insurance Program, forcing Congress to act by July 31st on its own, taking the NFIP in on its own merits. So this is good and it's bad. It's good because I've heard a lot of grumblings in Congress that something will get done as an actual reform by July 31st. That means no more short-term extensions. That means allowing the private market to work with the NFIP even more. That means a lot of good things. Why it's bad is because if Congress decides not to act, this is the day before the Senate takes their summer recess. And so if Congress, and specifically the Senate, since that's where the bill has been moved to at this point, if the Senate decides not to act by July 31st, then we will have a 30-day lapse of the National Flood Insurance Program. That means no new flood insurance policies can be purchased and no renewals can be processed. So we're hoping that Congress acts in some way to get us past the July 31st date. So this is our contact info. You all have it. Again, some of it says Marshfield, some of it says our new information, which is now no flood, since we wanted to move towards a simpler web address, simpler email, and something that's easier to remember. So this is our contact info. I appreciate everybody listening. We're going to now move, it's not over, don't get up. We're now going to move over to Brian Baer, who's going to talk to us about home elevations. So thank you very much, and thank you, Brian.
Awesome.
You want to use this?
Sure. Why not? Forward and back. Talk to the volume. All right. Great. Thanks. Thank you, Joe. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Brian Baer. I'm the executive director of the Elevated Studio. We are a design-founded nonprofit based in Manhattan. Yes, that's New York. Not Manhattan, Kansas. We do architecture. We advocate for our clients. We educate good folks like yourselves. And at the end of it, we also do a fair amount of client management. We feel that it's important as part of the recovery process not to just talk about the brick and mortar of the recovery process, but also the social economic recovery of the process. So you make up the vast majority of that socioeconomic component of your recovery. The brick and mortar, buildings just go up, they come down, they get destroyed, they get rebuilt. That part's the easy part. It's the recovery of the individual. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, it takes a little bit more. Talk a little bit closer? Got it. All right. I'm used to using my referee voice, so sorry about that.
Let me turn that up a little bit
Okay.
for you too. Let's see.
Better? Yeah? All right. So we approach recovery from a holistic point of view. It's not just elevating your home or repairing your home. We are still dealing with clients from Sandy that happened in 2012, and we're still working with them through their social and economic issues. So, but because we're architects, we always see a beautiful place at the end of the day. Unfortunately, this homeowner had a 36-inch diameter oak tree gently relocate itself onto the house, and this is what was left. Sandy was not a windstorm. Sandy was a flood event. But unfortunately, this gentleman who lives on the Shinnecock Nation, which is a sovereign nation out in Southampton, New York, this is what happened to him. Why do we do this? Well, over the course of time, the federally declared disasters have only gone one way, which is up. In 2011, which is that nice little spike you see at the end of the chart, we had 242 federally declared disasters. So far today, in 2018, we have 7. It's going to go up, right? Bottom line, it's going to go up. Despite what side of the political spectrum you are, climate change is not a 4-letter word. It's here to stay. We as people have a horrible batting average against Mother Nature, since it is baseball season, right? Go Sox. It's 0-0-0. Great batting average. We want to try to maybe creep that up a little bit. But so what are the issues that really face us during recovery? So here in the Northeast, we have an aged built environment. A lot of our homes are older than 100 years old. Some are around 300 years old. We have an aging in place population, which means that the house that you grew up in, chances are you're going to be living in until you're no longer living, right? And then because we're humans, and sometimes we're a little thick, or as my grandmother used to say, stunad, I want what I want. It's that intangible thing, right? And by gum, I'm gonna get it. Come heck or high water, I'm gonna do that. 1983, excuse me, was a sort of a bellwether year for us design and construction professionals, because that year was when flood control building codes were put on the books. So if you follow the trends of building codes, 1983 was that important year. Well, interestingly enough, in New York City, 84% of all the buildings within the flood zones were built before 1983. Here in South Shore of Massachusetts, and I would imagine in Boston and the North Shore, that percentage is probably around the same, maybe even ticked up a little bit higher. All of those buildings that were red tagged post-Sandy were built before 1983, and 100%, almost 100% of all the buildings destroyed were built before 1983. So think about your home, think about your community, think about when those homes were built, those homes or structures were built, and you can kind of connect the dots of what happens. Polling all of our clients and those who we have educated since 2012, this is sort of the things that we see and hear our constituency come back. So basically, I want my life back. You know, they may still be displaced. We have a good 2-3 dozen of our clientele out of our 250 or so that are still not living in their home. They are displaced and have been so since Sandy struck in October of 2012. That's 5+ years. We're coming up on 6 years in the New York area. I want to be back in my home. I want to be safe. I want to make my family safe. And that's a great question that we hear a lot is, well, now that this event happened, what can I do to make my family safe again? And so we talk about resilience, we talk about sustainability. These are pretty great words to be discussing. And to a certain degree, we as design professionals kind of understand it because we've been operating in this space for as long as we have. But hearing people who may have never been affected before and are now discussing what resilience means, discussing what sustainability means, it's a new concept to wrap their arms around. And I hope we can work with you to understand that. Some people, yeah, they want their garage back. They want to be made whole. They want to elevate. And yes, sometimes they do want that basement back so that they can hang the disco ball from the 1970s and do all that good stuff, right? But one thing we want to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, this comes down to dollars, right? So for every dollar spent now, we'll save 4 in the future. I'm sorry, seven now. About 10 years ago, it was 1 and 4. So when we're talking about the construction cost of repair, the construction cost of elevating what you're going to be doing now, fast multiply that by 4 or 7 or maybe even 10 times a decade down in the future, and it makes itself up. And I'm sure with insurance costs going up, even if it's 1%, that's a real number. That's a very real number. Our relationship with the coast isn't changing. It's actually increasing. So we're not retreating from the coast, as many of us in the profession may think we should. We're actually increasing our density along the coast. So we're not doing the pizza box on the chopsticks drill. Right? This isn't what we see here on the East Coast. This is kind of what you see maybe on the West Coast. But what we do see here on the East Coast is maybe the single-story elevated bungalow. This actually happens to be in the lower 9th ward of New Orleans. But we're also seeing replicas of this type of design throughout the metropolitan New York area. Or we're seeing something similar to what's on the right side of the screen, which is on Staten Island, which is a brand new home that was knocked down. It was rebuilt, and you can see it is a full story above grade. And then it keeps going up and up and up. So this house is actually only about 14 feet wide. So if you count your 2-foot ceiling tiles, you can kind of see how wide this building actually is. And these are just some of the other buildings that we're seeing. So this is actually out on Long Island, which is not too dissimilar from the residential vocabulary that we see here on the South Shore, even on the North Shore, single-family home, maybe a third of an acre or up to an acre of land around it, but it's still elevated. In the upper left-hand corner, we see a closed foundation with some automatic flood vents to allow the water to come in and gently flow out. And then if you get a little bit closer to that coastline, on the lower right-hand side, you see an open foundation that may be hidden by some lattice work. It allows some car parking, it allows a boat or a jet ski or something like that. Or what a lot of people do in some of the more densely populated communities that we're working in, like Long Beach, they use that space as covered outdoor space. So you'll see some picnic tables and some chairs and the occasional rowing machine. And people use that newfound space when they didn't have a backyard, and now they have this great 8-foot high space that's covered by their home. But it's a process, right? So this is a home that we completed in Babylon, New York, which is a great little coastal community, much like Marshfield. It's got a cute little main street, bunch of restaurants, coffee shops, again, not too dissimilar from here. And then it's got a series of canals that allow people to move their boats in and out into the Sound and the Atlantic Ocean. 1,200 square foot single-story bungalow on a crawl space. Sound familiar? and they saw about 4.5 feet of water from the storm surge. And this house is about 3/4 of a mile away from the shoreline. And they are in an AE 7 zone, which is a 100-year flood zone, base flood elevation at 7. New York State has a requirement of base flood elevation plus 2 feet of freeboard, which is your design flood elevation. And that comes into account when you look at your elevation certificate. Right? So, Joe, can you tell me, does Massachusetts have a design flood elevation?
1 foot above A zone.
1 foot above BFE, so if
In
you're...
A zones and 2 in B zones.
Oh, it's 2 in B zones? Okay. So if you're in an A zone and you're, let's say along Plymouth Avenue, and you're in an AE 14, that means that your first floor will be at elevation 15. Now that's not 15 feet above the deck, it's 15 feet above the mean high tide. So that's a common misconception about reading that elevation certificate. And if you're in a V zone, as Joe just mentioned, it's 2 feet above your base flood elevation, but that's to the underside of the structure of your house. And then you're gonna have about 1 foot of structure, your floor. So you're actually 3 feet above your base flood elevation if you're in the V zone. And I think I saw VE 22.
We have varying.
Yeah, I think that was the highest I saw was VE 22 and then I think VE 18 or something like that. So, in any event, so in the upper left-hand corner, I apologize for the darkness of that. I took it at like 9 o'clock in the morning one day. That was about a month or 2 after Sandy struck. And in the upper right-hand corner, we are prepping the house to be elevated. The lower left-hand corner are the lifting beams that get used to elevate the home. The old foundation, once the house is elevated, the existing foundation is entirely removed. A nice base slab of compressed fill comes back in. We put in helical piles because most of the South Shore of Long Island is bog or sand. So you can't drive a pile, you actually have to use a helical pile, which looks like a big corkscrew. Goes into the ground. We build our new foundation, and then we lower the existing house on top of the new foundation. We don't drop the house. Dropping the house is bad. And that's actually happened to a couple of homeowners. About 2 years after Sandy struck, we had a really bad nor'easter in October, like almost 2 years to the day. And a couple of the cribbing towers, which I'll show you in a video in a second, were undermined, and a bad thing happened. So the lower right-hand corner is sort of the almost finished result of the elevated home. I'm going to try to do this. Where's my... That, same house. This is a, you can thank Sue for this one. So this is on a coordinated jack system, so it's not, 15 big burly guys with a corkboard screw, cranking it out. This is actually this little machine right here. That's a coordinated jack system, so a series of hydraulic lines with hydraulic oil with the jacks, and it goes up in 18-inch lifts. So click it, moves up 18 inches, you set the Jenga towers, you settle it back down for a couple of minutes, let things settle, and then you do it again until you get to the proper height. And usually what happens is the lifting company will lift the home about 3 or 4 feet above the top of the new foundation so that the concrete folks can come in and do their work. Make sense? Lowers down, bolt it, move on to the actual repair of the home. want to see that again? So the entire time it took to elevate this home from start to finish was about 6 hours. And we're only going up about 8 feet to get it to this height. We've done others where we're actually elevating the house up 20 feet. And there are other conditions where you may have an occupied basement that is legal, but under FEMA guidelines, you can't physically elevate the basement because of the constructability of the existing slab, right? So you do what's called a double lift. So you lift that upper floor up. The first 8 feet, you build your foundation, you build your deck, and then you lift it up another 8 feet, build your exterior walls, and lower it down. That's fun to watch. Yeah. Okay. So where are the opportunities and where are the holes? So right now, the upper bar, the non-resilient bar, right? There's probably a fair number of homes in your community that meet this. And in 2012, 2013, before New York actually started elevating their homes and making their communities resilient, that's what we were looking at. Now we are 4 or 5 years past Sandy, and we're starting to get into the not planned area, where you have that sawtooth effect. You can look down any particular street in a damaged community, and some houses are up because they've received their money, some houses are down because they haven't received their money for one reason or another. In some communities, the home may be a second home or maybe a seasonal rental. Those are not eligible usually for Community Development Block Grant for Disaster Recovery Funding, or CDBG-DR, if you like your acronyms. So those have to be privately funded. But what we're hoping for is that bottom line, right? We're hoping for in the future that as we move closer to the coast, as we don't retreat from the coast, we are becoming more and more planned so that when climate change affects us, it doesn't affect us all that much. Maybe it blows off a gutter, maybe you lose a couple of roof tiles, and that's about the extent of it. You're not losing your home. You're not losing your belongings. You're not losing a loved one. So we're hoping that in a not too distant time, we can get to that point. We created a program, though, to help mitigate some of this, and because we like acronyms, we call it Red Sea. So it's Resilience Through Education and Design Centers, or clinics, depending on what we're doing. And it's a two-parter. Part one is the actual education of contractors, architects, good folks like yourselves, in the process of mitigation and resilience. And then the second part is the design and the construction to elevate your home. Part one is kind of what we're in now here in the South Shore and the Massachusetts coastline. Part two is what we're doing in New York. So think about that as you progress yourselves forward. Education is a lot of power. It gives you a lot of opportunity to ask your questions and make sure that you understand where you want to go. And we as design professionals are going to ask you, the homeowner or the property owner, where do you want to go with your resilience measures? These are what design clinics look like. I've been wearing bow ties forever and a day, so it's kind of like, where's Brian? It's part of the running joke. Community program goals, we always want to make sure that we are achieving the community goals. The community may have a comprehensive master plan that they implemented in 2002. We want to make sure that that's being taken into consideration as we're progressing it forward in a resilient manner, resilient and sustainable manner. At the end of the day, it's that sweet spot. You know, it meets the social, it meets the economic, and it meets the environmental goals of the community. We truly want to make sure that we are building smart, so that we don't have to deal with this ever again. And it's a challenge because it takes a lot of education, it takes a lot of time, and yes, it takes money, but if you, the community, really want it, and given the number of people in this room, it appears as though you do really want this, just be patient about it. And so with that, I want to give some quick little thoughts of advice. It's a process. Recovery is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Your patience is going to be tested every day, but be patient. Be persistent. Ask those questions. If you don't understand the answer, ask it again. If you don't understand it a second time, ask it a third time, and keep asking it until you get the answer that you feel comfortable with. And lastly, don't give up hope. It's hard. Recovery is hard. You've lost belongings. You've potentially lost memories. You've lost, your structure that you grew up in. But don't give up hope. You will get through this. I can assure you about that. Unfortunately, my email address is a little bit longer than Joe's. It's my full name, Brian Baer at theelevatedstudio.org. BRIANBAER. We have some information in the back. Joe, do we have a little bit of time to show about a 5-minute video on elevation?
We're a little tight on
A
time.
little tight, that's fine. So I'll do a shameless plug. On our website under resources, there is a FEMA video that I was a part of. It's actually a nationally awarded FEMA video about elevating in a coastal, obviously in a coastal community, but it also has some important information if you have an access or functional need. So lifts, vertical wheelchair lifts, if you have a functional need, it's an important video. So with that, I thank you, Joel.
Thank you so much, Brian. That is, it's a great resource. We have been tapped in now to Brian and his group for a month or so, and it's just amazing the resource that they are. So the reason that I want to hold off on showing the video is twofold. One, because we have one more speaker here before we go to our expert panel. I know we're running just a little late, by about 5 minutes or so. So we're going to have Marshfield Town Administrator Mike Moresco come forward to talk about the Marshfield's post-disaster response. But I am going to remind people that after the expert panel, Brian, myself, the members of my board of directors will be in the back of the room so that you can get some of this information directly from them. So with that, I'll bring it to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll be brief so we can get back to the real important information for all of our residents. I do want to thank Joe and the Coastal Coalition for all the great work that they do, making sure that this information is available to our residents and that you can get the help that you need to make your house sustainable. And we want you to stay right here in Marshfield first and foremost. Very quickly, March Madness. We had 300-year storms in a row that battered the coastline, battered the seawalls. We had severe destruction to our seawalls. Right now, we're still doing the analysis. Town has to go through an analysis. We brought in some professional people to take a look at our seawalls. You may have seen them out there. We had a drone looking at the seawall. We had people physically down on the beaches looking at the seawall. We had Northern Construction, who's actually done some of our seawalls, and we estimate right now about 4,000 linear feet of seawall will have to be either rebuilt or repaired at a cost of anywhere from $12 million to $15 million. Less any type of grants. Will be very proactive in going after any grants or any federal money out there to make it as easy as possible on our residents. We had the feds in, FEMA was in to take a look for the president to make a federal disaster declaration. There has to be a threshold. When the FEMA folks were here, they said in Plymouth County, it's $10 million, which doesn't seem like a lot of money. I know Marshfield, they sort of box you in to the storms. We had 3 storms, one right after another. We're supposed to be able to tell the federal government on that middle storm, which seawalls were damaged. So very quickly, we estimated that there was about $2.5 million of actual seawall damage for that middle storm. So hopefully they take that count. They go to Situate, they go to Duxbury. Hopefully by now they're tallying and they're going to declare an emergency, and that will help people. Really it's the cleanup. DPW has been tremendous. They're going through the cleanup right now. People that are down on the seawall, they know how much sand and rock and dirt just got on of Brant Rock. And you can see how high everything's piled. All of the dirt and rocks have been cleared off of the Brant Rock Chapel area. And then really we're taking a look at the infrastructure, the roadways, the sidewalks, the curbing, the guardrails, the number of telephone poles have to be replaced. And along with that, we're also doing cleanup with with trees. There were, hundreds and hundreds of trees that were down. I don't have to tell people looking around, a lot of people were without power for many days. If you didn't have a generator, it was even more difficult. So the town's facing a lot of the similar challenges that you're going through. We're all going to work through it and get through this together. And it's thanks to great organizations like the Coastal Coalition that will help all of our residents get through it and build a better, sustainable house. So with that, thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Now, we have I see some hands out there for questions. What we're going to do is we're going to bring up our expert panel. There's a bunch of people here, so I'm going to have some of my board, some of the, one of the state officials here, Eric Carlson, if you could come forward from DCR. I'm going to have Steve Amico from our board of directors, if you could come up front. Tim Carty, and I saw Tim Williams is here, our vice chair. If you want to come up, you can. You don't have to. And Doris, if you want to come up, you can. Just sit at the front table here. And Brian, if you want to come forward, you can too. To sit at the front table. Just pick a seat anywhere. Don't trip over the cord, please. Right, and I'm going to be here as a moderator for the panel. We do have other experts in the room. So as we get questions that an expert in the audience can answer, I'm going to call on them. Let me turn the mic on real quick here for you guys, and you can pass that around. Here, Tim, test that.
Test.
How about now?
Test.
Yeah.
Test.
Okay. Just don't yell. Okay, in front of you here, we have Steve Amico from on the Massachusetts Coastal Coalition's Board of Directors. He's with Coastal Heritage Bank, so he's our lending expert. Next to him, you have Tim Carty, who's on our Board of Directors. He's from Murphy Carty Insurance. He's one of our insurance experts. You have Eric Carlson from DCR, and he's going to be our flood overall. He's an expert, and I'm talking expert on flood building codes. I only hope one day I can memorize the federal regulations that Eric has. So that Eric is going to be here to answer those questions. And Brian, of course, is our expert up here on pretty much anything when it comes to elevating your home. So what I'd like to do for this session, because what we'll do is we'll have kind of a dialogue here. If you have very, very specific questions, we ask that you wait till we open up the room to the workshop space in the back and in the front here for very specific questions. But we will take questions now from the audience on anything related to what we've talked about here. And I saw a hand over here, and we'll start here first. Just please state, for everyone here, just state your name and town. You don't have to give us your address.
Okay, my name is Beth Printer, and I'm from Marshfield, Green Harbor, actually. And I understand the seawall needs a lot of work, but I'm just wondering about beach replenishment to the dunes that got damaged. And this might be a question for the town.
So I'll repeat the question since we don't have a mic for the audience, is what are we going to do about the beach nourishment and replenishment of potential sand loss? And since we have the town of Marshfield in the audience, if you feel at any point at any of these questions you might want to answer as well, just put your hand up or stand up. And do we want to go to you first, Greg, and then we'll go to our panel?
Sure.
Okay, Greg, just speak a little louder since there's no mic.
I'm the town planner. The town has gotten a grant from the state to evaluate removing the dredge material from the harbor that we have to do every year. And the first place we're going to try to put it is on Bay Ave, because that beach is pretty depleted. There is some beach nourishment that is going to be part of the seawall reconstruction over on the Brant Rock side. And And a couple of years ago, we did some beach nourishment from the South River into Wrexham Beach. We are going to need a lot more beach nourishment and a lot more money. We also need all the property owners that own down to the low tide mark to give us the rights for public access and for putting the beach nourishment down. If it is privately owned, we can't put any sand there. So those meetings have to happen fairly quickly. In May, Army Corps is coming back. We don't have time to get that material on the beach, but the town administrator, the DPW, and others are working frantically to have it trucked to the DPW barn, about 30,000 cubic yards. Whatever we dredge out, we're going to be putting over it at the DPW barn, and then the next dredging, we will try to get both materials back on the beach. So we
Okay.
are working on it.
Great. Was there anyone at the front of the room that wanted to answer that question? Okay. We have another question, yes.
So my name is Corey O'Brien. I'm from Quincy, Post Island Road. I'm wondering, how do you determine if a house is eligible to be elevated or torn down? Because I was like 100 years old. I don't know what's specific and not specific, so I'll let you tell me.
So the substantial damage letter that you would get from your local municipality will give you some guidance on that. The threshold that we've been using in New York, and I think is really a FEMA thing, is 50 and then 80%. So if you're 50%, you would get funding for mandatory elevation. If you were 80% or close to it, it's a full reconstruction. There are thresholds that we use as design professionals to inspect an existing structure to determine its viability, if it's going to survive an elevation, even if it's at 51% damaged. And that's kind of done on a case-by-case basis.
Who does that? Town or?
So your design professional, your architect or engineer will help guide you through that observation of whether or not the house will survive the elevation. But really the municipality is going to tell you, here's your 50% or here's your not 50% substantial damage.
So thank you. So I think the summary, so that question was really, how do I know whether my building's going to be elevated or torn down? So I think what I would say is in the processes we described through the claims process, ICC process, substantial damage, the SISD process, these are not easy processes well, I shouldn't say they're not easy, they're just comprehensive processes. So there's going to be a lot of hands involved, and I think that's really the end of the story on that one is those are the people that will do it, but you're going to have a lot of people involved during that process. Questions? We're going to start, when we get a lot of hands, I'm going to work left to right. So we'll start here and go that way. Yes?
Ellen McDonald, Marshfield. I was just wondering, what's the process on that ICC? What's the beginning? What's the first thing you need to do there?
Okay, so the question is, where do you start when you want to move towards ICC to figure out if you can even get ICC? And the first step is going to be your adjuster. So if anyone here wants to chime in, go ahead, but I'm going to answer for the first part of this. So the first thing you're going to want to do is your adjuster is not going to determine whether you can get ICC, but they're going to indicate whether they think you might be able to move that direction. And the way they do that is they take an estimated replacement value of your building, whatever they come up with on their estimating program. And then they take a tally of what your estimated loss is. And usually the threshold, and Brian might be able to answer this better for me, usually in big disasters, they usually start to indicate around 35 to 40%. If you're right in that range, they go, okay, you might be able to get ICC through a substantial damage designation. What they do is they either give to you to give, or they send, and I've heard it's gone both ways now, to the community your what they call the damage assessment letter, which basically goes through and tells you what your claim value is and that you're getting close to the 50% threshold. That's given to the community, and then that begins the community's decision on whether you're going to get the substantial damage letter. It all has to be started with the substantial damage letter. And then that's determined based on the contractor estimates versus the market value of your building. But the discussion will go from your adjuster, that is the first place, and you then have a discussion with the community officials based on the information given to you by your adjuster.
Joe,
Yes, so Greg has a
when you
community.
say community, it is the building department?
Yes.
The building commissioner is the person in Marshfield that reviews that?
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's Marshfield, I'm sorry, I should have been specific on that. It's Marshfield Building Department. It may be a different department. I know we have other communities here. It may be different departments in different communities.
Also the building department.
Situate's also building. And Quincy, do we know if it's building department? Building department.
It has to be.
Okay, it has to be the building department, so never mind. I'm gonna start saying building department. Thank you, Eric and Brian. All right, so we're gonna go, yes.
Hi, Mark Vogel, Ridge Road, Marshfield. And while I've heard, a lot of talk here, which we've heard about all the problems with Grand Rock, with seawalls and beach erosions and Wrexham and Green Harbor. I live along the river. Are there any plans that you talked about, we've lost substantial amount of land, I've been living there for about 10 years now. And we've lost a lot of erosion in the river of our land. Is there any plans that you talked about, any mitigation plans that could help us, really reinforce our properties against the rising rivers?
So the question is for the community of Marshfield, is there anything that the town is planning to do on helping structures or some type of nourishment or some type of mitigation on the rivers in Marshfield?
I cannot speak for the Conservation Commission, but it's the Conservation Commission that you would have to be permitted for any type of work in that, because that's the wetland area. It's kind of a different animal. Yes, on beach nourishment, we still have to go through the Conservation Commission and permitting and the state and everything else. But when you get into river erosion, it's a little different animal than on the beaches.
So, again, some sites to follow on that. Are you saying though, we would have to apply to do something on our own, or is there any kind of grants or anything that we could?
There is no town grants or funds. I don't know of any state or federal on the river specific. It's something we can try to find out. Kind of have our hands full at the moment.
So I guess I'd throw it back to our panel here. Maybe Eric, I don't know if you know of any state grants for that type of work.
Off the top of my head, I don't know about state grants specifically for that kind of work.
Okay.
It might fall under something you can do under HMGP,
Okay. So-
erosion control.
Sure, so what Eric is saying is that erosion control, if we had that presidentially declared disaster, you may want to have a plan together and move forward with an HMGP grant, or the community may at that point as well. Okay, so I saw another question in the back here, and then I'll go back over in the front, yes.
Okay. My name's Alan Alper, I'm in Grant Rock. My question is, does the town of Marshfield intending on applying for the flood mitigation assistance grant?
So the question of the town of Marshfield is the town of Marshfield going to move forward with an application to FMA or the Federal Mitigation Assistance Grant when the grant application opens this year?
So the town of Marshfield would need severe repetitive loss properties to have their information and stuff ready in order for us to even try. If we do not have any severe repetitive loss properties, you have to meet the bigger waters definition, not just your insurance. You might have it under CRNs, you might be called a severe repetitive loss, but we have 169 of those in town. But when you actually get to the bigger waters definition, it becomes 10 or 13 residents in Marshfield. We already addressed 3 of them. So you might think you're it, but unless you have a letter from FEMA saying you're a severe repetitive loss property and you're eligible for that grant, we might not be able to help you.
So how
You
would
could
they-
be
how
a
would they-
repetitive loss, and we could have 10 or 15 repetitive losses, but this is a competitive grant. We're up against communities like Situate, not to, say anything bad about them, but they have a lot more severe repetitive loss properties, and, when you have 10 severe repetitive loss properties and Marshfield only has 3 repetitive loss properties, we're not gonna get that grant. So it comes down to on the town side, because I'll probably be the person doing it again, if that happens. We gotta make sure we have a strong application in order to make sense for us to charge.
So I guess just a follow-up to that question, my question would be, Greg, what are you looking for to give you an indication that you would want to move forward with an FMA? Are you looking for people that meet that definition to have their stuff ready to show you that they're ready to move forward?
Yes.
Okay.
And if we had another acquisition and demolition, the state and the federal people love that. So if there are people that have said enough, and they want out, that can put us over the top in a competitive round.
Sure. So what I would say to people in the room wondering if there's an FMA applicability here in Marshfield, if they want to move forward with that, the first thing to do, and usually the best way to indicate whether you are a severe repetitive loss, again, there's 2 definitions, actually there's 3. The two that count are the FEMA one for your flood insurance, the grant one is different, the grant is a separate one. Your agent, your insurance agent, though, should be able to get you the information for either definition because it's both the same facility within FEMA looks at both definitions. So talk to your insurance agent to find out if you meet the grant definition. If you do and you're serious about applying to the FMA program and you live in Marshfield or Situate or any of these communities and you want your community to move forward with an FMA application, you need to show interest and you need to start talking to them now. Usually, and what we saw last year, the information on the FMA that you've picked up in the back is based off of last year's dollars in last year's national opening for the grant. So, but it's going to be fairly similar. Congress, like I mentioned, appropriated $260 million to FMA or really for the whole hazard mitigation assistance program. So there's dollars that have been appropriated, we're just waiting for the grant program to open. However, when it does open, it's only 2 months. So what I had mentioned earlier is have your engineering plans done on how you would elevate, have your estimates from your contractors done, and talk to your community and express interest. Because if there's enough interest, the town will say, yeah, sure, this is worth going forward with an FMA application. If there's not enough interest, it takes a lot of the town planner or the person applying, it takes a lot of that department's time to move forward. So it's going to be burdensome on them and they want to have a lot of good qualifying participants. So, all right, so we're going to go here and work that way. Yes?
Dennis Walker, Green Harbor. I'm basically looking at the issue of prevention. I just moved, I've been here 4 months, we've got hit twice. My 2 losses just met my deductible, so it's out of pocket. I'm looking possibly to raise, where do I go? Private money, possibly any prevention money for mitigation?
Sure.
From the federal government?
Sure. So I'm going to speak and I'm going to have Brian answer some of that. So from a prevention standpoint, again, there's the FMA program or HMGP. The FMA is the only one right now where you could possibly move forward if you meet the qualifications for a strong application. Your flood insurance policy unfortunately doesn't have any preventative dollars you can tap into, although Congress is thinking about changing that and allowing you to use a percentage of your ICC for preventative work, but that's a different discussion because it hasn't passed yet. So Brian, I throw it over to you on where you see people starting when it comes to elevation.
The start is what you feel the cost of the repair is going to be. And that may be a little bit hard to understand if you've not worked in the trades before. But getting a contractor or an architect or an engineer to come in and take a look at your home itself and see what, or have them give an opinion of what damage they see. Rather than doing some selective demolition, you want to just get a quick little cursory look at what that value might be. I'm actually going to throw it over to Steve, I believe, and he can talk about the 203K construction loan, which is becoming more and more popular in the New York area as more and more people who weren't made eligible for the FEMA assistance are turning to this program, this funding program, to help mitigate and prepare for future events.
How's that for you?
Unfortunately, we don't do FHA loans. Most of the FHA, that's through the FHA, and most of those are done through mortgage companies or the larger lenders to be able to help you with those type of loans. I can tell you what we've done at Coastal Heritage. We've been able to, if people had grant money that was coming to them, the way a lot of it worked is that you had to get the project completed first, and then you'd get reimbursed. If they had equity in the home, we actually granted them an equity line of credit for that amount of money, and we dispersed it just like we would disperse a construction loan. So as the items were completed, we would get it done. So once it was all dispersed, then the monies would actually come from the grant money, and they would come to us and the borrower. And then they would just sign it over to us. We'd pay that equity line down. We weren't really concerning ourselves with the affordability on it because we knew the money was coming. So we were able to help them with it, but we still had to be concerned with loan to value because we were only allowed to lend up to 80% loan to value without going into any kind of PMI insurance, and the PMI insurance won't allow that. But we have been able to help people out through our equity program by doing it that way. And trying to, assist them in that. But as far as the 203K loan, that would be something you'd have to look through FHA.
Okay. So another question, yes, right there.
Hey, how you doing? Dan Shea, Quincy, Mass. We're getting pretty hard at it. Interested in this FMA program, so trying to follow it. It looks like you need to do the engineering. I have an engineer coming in Sunday to take a look at my property. I want to raise my property up. It's had repetitive hits over the years since 78, 91, and then 2010, and so on. But I'm one of the lucky ones that didn't get into my first floor. But it's been beating the heck out of the foundation. It's a cinder block foundation, so it's not going to sustain too many more hits. But it was, I have $5,000 deductible, so I'm not going to be able to get any. They were telling me I could repoint it, but I could probably fight it, but it's not worth it at this point. I just want to see if I can get the home raised, But, so it looks as if I have to do the upfront costs, like you're saying, the engineering, have an architect look at it, design a foundation that would work for my home, all of that. And then, so from there, I have to take that, we have to apply as a community as a whole. Okay.
Yes.
So the more people, the better.
Yes,
Okay.
the more good applicants, and a good applicant, because, this is a nationally competitive grant program, and as Greg mentioned, there are communities that may have better grant applicants. They may not have more severe repetitive loss properties, but if you've got a community with 20 severe repetitive losses and only 3 apply versus a community with 5 severe repetitive losses and then they all apply, they're going to have a better chance, most likely, for getting the application because it's nationally competitive. And I know we have a Quincy City Councilor in the back. Yes.
Now retired.
Retired. Oh, okay.
Yes. Question on that program that Dan referenced. I thought it was my understanding that the community applies, but the homeowner has to commit to the project.
Yes.
Get funding up front, then if the grant is received by Quincy, you would then get reimbursed. But you have to take that financial risk, make that commitment, elevate your home, and hope the grant gets awarded if you get reimbursed.
The actual work to elevate the home is done only once the community knows that they're getting the grant. And Brian, I'm going to throw it to you to kind of go through that process to get past the.
They talked about potentially using like affordable housing trust funds or another source
Oh, sure.
to upfront the costs and then potentially reimburse
Sure.
to get that homeowner some assistance.
Okay.
So some of the creative programs that we've looked at, we don't have that in place, but.
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
So the question is, Quincy's interested, or the individuals in Quincy are interested in the FMA program, and they just kind of want to understand, the process from once the community is awarded the grant, then what's the process the homeowners then go through?
Right, so the homeowner would then be awarded the value of the grant, whatever that value is. You're going to complete if the drawings are not complete, 100% completed, you're going to get them completed. You're going to submit them to the building department. You're going to hopefully get your permit approved. At that same time that you are submitting to the building department, you're going to entertain no less than 3 bids from qualified, licensed, and insured contractors. Licensed, qualified, insured contractors. We are going through some very significant contractor fraud in New York. I won't get into the weeds with that, but it's ugly. You will get a written contract that you'll read and hopefully understand from your contractor. They will give you a schedule, a time schedule. They will give you a schedule of values. They will ask for a deposit. They will tell you when to move out. You will move out, and then they will turn your home into a construction site for which you won't enter until they hand you the keys. That whole process from when the gun goes off with the design professional to the time you get your keys, if you're using either a construction loan or your own money, could be anywhere from 12 months to 18 months. If you are, if this does become a federally declared disaster, multiply that time by 2 or 3. Because the federal government encumbers the money through Congress, it goes through HUD, because they are the administrators of the Community Development Block Grant for Disaster Recovery, who then grants it to the state, or in this particular case, the Commonwealth, through their recovery program, and then they will grant that money to you. Then you have to go through their hoops to get the funding granted. So that's a long-winded answer, but the FHA is about 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
And if you're using CDBG money, which is federal money, it's longer.
And Eric, do you want to talk, I don't know if you're the right person to talk to about this, but how does the state, what's their process in distributing the money to the community, and then the community has the option, right, to distribute it to the homeowners in segments, right? Is that how the process goes?
I've not been involved in that.
Oh, you haven't, okay, all right. Yeah, so Greg knows, actually.
Let's go back to the early application phase.
Sure.
So in Marshfield, what we required last time is the homeowners, when they do their package up front, to show us that they really want to do this and think that they can, and we lost about half of the people that told us they really wanted to do this during this 3-year process, because we started and it took 3 years before we actually have the money and the work is starting to be done. So it takes time, it's not immediate. Number 2, we asked them to give us 3 different quotes from contractors, et cetera, up front. And what we did when we put in the application is we blended the 3 different numbers to get an average, and we went to the state and the federal government with that average. And in a way that helped us a lot, because both of the houses that are going forward with the elevations have had multiple things that they've had to change this, they got to redesign that, they want to go up higher, so things will change from your initial thoughts. It takes a lot of time, and you want to, and that's why I was stressing, you really want to have a good application up front on that. And then another comment, Marshfield does not qualify for CDBG block grants because of the income levels. And we would also have to designate an area, a severe blight area, in order to get that. And I don't think any area in town would like that designation. So it's just not something that's going to happen in Marshfield. So just be aware of that as well. We don't have other pots of money that other communities might have.
Okay, great. So that's community.
It is a reimbursement.
Yes,
The
so,
homeowner has to fund the funds, when awarded the grant, while you're waiting for
Yep.
money to come back to you, it is reimbursed. So
That's correct.
That's a big thing to understand,
Yep.
that if you go through this process,
Yep.
you have
And-
to have funds money.
And that's why Steve was talking about what they do from a lending perspective, because they will loan, and if there's a sufficient loan to value, they'll loan the money to you so you can do it, and then you will get the reimbursement, which ends up paying that back. So it's a reimbursement program. I hope that's starting to
It'll
open.
take the package through it, once you get all your, engineering done and
The
Planning department.
planning department, the part of the department that's the department that's applying for the grant, which,
In Situate, it's the coastal resource officer.
okay,
So in various towns, it may be different things.
yep, that is where it is a different department, so, thank you. So yes, I have a question here, and then I think there's one over there, yes.
Dennis Walker again. So basically what I'm seeing is the federal money will give the money to the state will decide what each individual community will get, and then each individual community will decide what the residents will get and what they will get to do repairs. Is this how it works?
Not no. What happens is the grant's awarded based on the application, and then the money is distributed to the homeowners through the community. Do you do it through the community, Greg, or is it the state that's distributing it?
So the federal government gives it to MEMA.
That's right.
MEMA
Yep.
is the one that's the banker.
Yep.
The town does not start issuing checks to people and going around. Also, there is a finite award. So for ours, we got a set pot of money. You can't go more than that.
Yep.
Which is why we try to build by having the 3 quotes, give us a little buffer room, because if you go over, and that's it. And yes, it's a reimbursement, but they do payments
Yep.
in thirds if it's a
Thirds.
large, expensive project, so it's not all out on first.
I guess what I'm looking to find out from that is, okay, so you get the money, and you didn't get what you were totally looking for. So now, how do you decide what the town is gonna keep, and what you're gonna give the residents?
So the town doesn't keep anything?
No, but you have to use certain money, you're applying also for certain money to make repairs. Right?
No, that's a different thing.
That's a different grant. We're talking FMA strictly, yeah.
The communities are applying money for like seawalls and stuff like that. That's
It's
entirely
separate.
separate from housing elevation grant or an acquisition grant. Again, the town has, we don't get any of that money, et cetera. If you're a severe repetitive loss, it's 100% reimbursement. If you're a repetitive loss, it's a 70%.
90%.
Well, it's 70 for us.
Oh, well, it's
So
90
again,
under the FEMA guidance, so is that's 90% for severe or for repetitive loss.
So just be aware, and if you do go over budget, so say you did try to plan out, but something, you're on a barrier beach, or something came up that you were not aware of, and they do a pretty thorough review when we go through the application process. We even have historic people come and check the land and everything else. But if there's something that's unforeseen and you do run over that, if there is not, so say Mike does one, I do one, and Val does one. Mike's under, there is the possibility that we could use a little bit of the money that was left over from Mike to assist one or the other properties owner. But if all 3 are at or above, then the rest of it, the individual has to come up.
Thank you so much, Greg. Did anyone here want to add anything to that discussion? Okay, great questions, thank you. Was there another question over here? Oh, Doris, and Doris has actually been through this process, so it's always good to hear from you.
That is the fact that I had been through the process, and mine was a big house with a big project. I can tell you, I went through the process where you do the designs and all that. I got 3 bids, and then it took, as Greg said, I was about a year and a half or so later that the program gets approved. And I had, as everybody would have, one of the people who gave me a bid, who was my number 1 choice, had injured his back, was no longer able to get houses, okay, so all kinds of things. Plus, there were a few hidden things, as Greg mentioned, that you don't know until you get into it. They did end up coming out of my pocket, but I was, and I can tell you, was extremely happy. I was able to, because I did use local contractors and people that were doing the work within the town, so I could go look at their other projects and things like that, so I highly recommend that to you. On my house, I got my permit on the 15th of January, and I was back in my house on April 30th. And we drove 58 holes. So it was a big project, and I would also recommend anyone considering elevation, forget the 1 foot, the 2 foot, go 3. 3 feet get you into the 500-year floodplain, get you a very big discount on your flood insurance. And whatever money you might put into this project, you'll get it back in 5 or 10 years if your property is a severe repetitive loss, because you would have paid it out of insurance. So you have the opportunity to do it. Hit me at the worst time of my life, but I still did it.
And
I'll tell you what happened. That storm came in December of 2010. Had I not done what I did, I'd have lost my house, and I believe I'd have been sitting in the street. The seawall went down 60 feet from my house, 80 feet of seawall. Every bit of sand that was supporting my house was hauled out to sea. And it didn't matter, because I was high and dry with 17 feet into the ground.
And what's interesting, what I'll mention about that too, is not only do you avoid the insurance costs, you avoid the insurance losses. You know, since Doris elevated her home in 2010, she was a severe repetitive loss. She has not filed one claim in 8 years. Okay, one claim.
I just had to. It came under my house, the seawall went down.
So but think about that, one small claim in 10 years versus becoming a severe repetitive loss before that. So you're avoiding insurance claims and you're avoiding the insurance payments. So it's really, really a beneficial effort, and that's why we're so happy to have Brian here with all of his information about elevating homes, because we want to see that done. Question here and here, I'll start here and go over there, yes.
I know this is a basic question, but
Sure.
how much does it cost? No one said it.
That's actually a great question, so I'll throw it up to the front. What are you seeing, maybe Brian's a better one to answer, what are you seeing when it comes to elevations?
Well, the actual lifting and lowering of the house, depending on the size, can range anywhere from $15,000 to $45,000. But the real expense is the new foundation and the number of piles and how deep the piles have to go and so on and so forth. The most cost-efficient project that we are doing right now, well, let me put it in perspective. The house that I showed as an example, the 1,200 square foot house that was 1 story, that entire project was $240,000. But that had 18 piles that went down 40 feet. 40 feet, 40, yeah. Yeah. Because it wasn't sand, it was a swamp.
Did the people from China say hello?
Yeah. We drank a lot of wine with those corkscrews. But the foundation, given the soil conditions, we had to have some pretty large grade beams to support the house, even though the house wasn't all that big. And then the foundation itself. So the foundation cost alone was about $110,000 just for the concrete. That was about our average, but we've seen projects that are hovering around $500,000, and there are projects in the city like that 3-story structure that I showed the framing of. That house was $800,000, but that's using prevailing wage labor rates because it's Staten Island, being done by a very large construction manager. So that there's an economy there. So you can probably expect to spend for a typical 2,000 square foot house hovering around $200,000.
So we're going to go there and then over here. Yes.
Question, from the town's point of view, as like a neighborhood having going through these kinds of things, is there some sort of trend in terms of the assessed values changing?
So the question is there a trend within communities of assessed values changing, like post-elevation? Is that what you're looking at?
Like, you're in a transition mode in New York and all that. Now, we've seen a couple of years go by in New Jersey and New York. What's happening with the general values there in terms of assessed values?
Right now, the values have been on a steady incline, but not by, whole number percentages. It's been maybe 1/4% or 3/4%. It hasn't been a full percentage point yet. But that, and subsequently the taxes are proportionally changing. But as more and more streets become complete, that's going to change. And the municipalities are preparing for that. But a lot of people are still scratching their heads about it. So from the homeowner perspective, and what we try to guide our clients and the communities that we speak in, is this. You're getting grant money to make your home more resilient and safer for generations to come. And it's grant money, so it's free, right? It's free. It's not a loan, it's free. So why wouldn't you take free money to elevate your home to make your space safer? So you might see an increase in your property value, but your home is safer and your insurance costs are going down. So where would you want to be?
Okay, and then we had two. We'll go right there first for the first question.
Hi, Jason McDonald, Marshfield Bridge Road. Who decides whether it's going to pilings or elevate with a special kind of basement?
Great question.
Who makes that decision?
A lot of it has to do with what flood zone you're in. So if you're in a V zone, a velocity zone, you would be required to be on a pile foundation. If you were in an A zone, you could have a solid wall foundation, although you could also have a pile or column foundation. So that would be
Is one more expensive than the other?
pile foundation would be the more expensive foundation, almost always.
Okay. I mean, so what happens if like a contractor has an opinion that we should do pilings? Are you in an argument, a dispute with the insurance company at that point?
Well, not so much. I mean, the homeowner can decide what kind of foundation they want. If you're in an A zone, for instance, and you have an option of having a solid wall foundation or a pile foundation, the homeowner would really ultimately make that decision.
Yeah. Okay. And so how do they value, like, the cost of doing the work? Is it based on the value of the home or the value of the property or the rebuild? Or?
Well, the contractor would make a cost estimate based on what it cost him to do that
The
work.
contractor or the assessor?
Are you talking about what it's going to cost to do the work, or what the
Yeah.
flood insurance claim is going to pay for?
Exactly. Like,
Because they would
so-
be two different
So
things.
just make it in real terms. Ridge Road got flooded by frictional forces, right? And there was scour which undermined the basement.
Sure.
So it's compromised. So the whole house is not livable right now. So it needs to be lifted and elevated and all this work. Who estimates that total cost
Of the loss or?
of the loss?
Of the loss,
And so
okay.
rebuild it.
So so for foundation, so there's two things here. So for foundation damage, structural damage, they're gonna send an engineer out to make a determination, which you probably have already had done. So if I'm repeating things you've already had done, I apologize. So they'll have an engineer come out and they'll say if it was earth movement, what the cause was, and whether you'll have you'll get coverage for that. The actual value of what you're paid on your insurance claim, we'll break it down into two segments. We'll start with how your policy is written and what your occupancy is. If you are a single family dwelling You're there more than, technically 80% of the year, but for the adjuster's only looking at more than 50% of the year. And you're insured to within 80% of your replacement cost as determined by your insurance agent, then you will receive replacement cost on the damage. So replacement cost is the non-depreciated value of the items in your home and the home itself. The items in the home are always, the contents are always actual cash value. Then what they do is they estimate the adjuster, that's why they measure your home, because they're drawing your home and estimating the cost of those items in a program called Xactimate, and there are standard costs per square foot for certain items. So that's how they're coming up with what the value is of those items. And so a lot of the disagreements, and Brian can speak to this probably better than I can, in Hurricane Sandy, those disagreements were, some of them anyways, were you're not giving me what I think the value of X is, right? So my basement, and in the case of Sandy, the flood insurance policy will cover sudden erosion, but it will not cover earth movement. So if the earth has shifted and your foundation is cracked, and I've seen some of this, you have no coverage for your foundation. But if the building has all of a sudden scour in the shift and the engineer declares that it wasn't earth movement, there's coverage within the policy.
Frictional forces.
Sure.
Moving of water causes scour.
So, yeah, yep. So in that case, if it's...
Technical.
Sure, no, I think that makes sense. So in that case, so
I got a doctorate in this engineering report.
So as long as the engineering report doesn't say that you have earth movement as your cause of damage, you should have coverage based on what this cost per square foot, that the estimated replacement cost that they determined to be the cost of the damage to be. Now that we have the cost, and in this case we have, say, a $100,000 loss, we'll just estimate it at that. As Eric mentioned, you in a flood zone, doesn't matter whether it's an A zone or a B zone, you cannot have any part, if you are substantially damaged and you're required to elevate that building, you cannot have any subgrade space, that means any area below grade on all four sides, in a flood zone. Doesn't matter whether a high-risk flood zone, that's any A or B zone. So if you're in an A zone and you have foundation damage and it's more than 50% of the value of your building, you're somehow going to have to elevate that basement above grade on at least one side.
Okay, thank you.
And then we have one more question over here, yes.
I'm just curious to see what the plans actually are for the seawalls, for repair of the seawalls in the Grant Rock area.
Sure. So we had a question, I don't know whether Mike or Greg want to take it, about what the actual seawall is going to look like in its design.
It's all in the process. In Grant Rock, they are now replacing, ironically, on March 1st, the DPW inked a contract to replace about, I want to say, 600 feet of seawall. So where the store is that sells the marine products. So if you get down that road to the right, there's like an opening to go into the water. So they're
North Street?
Yeah, so they're doing that big section. It's sort of designed, I mean, to me, it looks like any other seawall. It's fairly thick. If you email me tomorrow, I'll see if we can
So
get
that's
you
as far as it's going though, just to north, like I'm on
Yes,
south,
like
so I'm
none
wondering.
of none of the storm damage, it's all in the, right now, we're just analyzing. So we're a long way from starting to replace. We have to get the money first on something like that. We may have to do a debt exclusion depending on, how much. Like I said to you, the estimated cost is somewhere between, 12, 14, 15 $million, dependent upon if it's going to have to be replaced or fixed. If fixed, it's about $1,500 a linear foot. If it's total rebuild and replaced, it's $3,500 a linear foot. So there's a lot of engineering that goes into it. Foster Avenue, I will tell you, usually newer design, and I think that may be the design, but that's not my daily work, that's up to the engineers to come up with. But on the piece of Foster Avenue was done last year, that seawall was done, it was rebuilt, and it was 2 feet higher than the existing seawall. And I can tell you from being out during the storm, those houses saw very little impact
because of the extra height and the way it, forced the wave to go up instead of coming forward.
So it has to be voted on each year, is that how?
Well, the cost, depending on when we put the package together, what's out there, then we have to come up with the money to do it. And, it'll probably take a couple of years to go through that process.
So I had 2 more questions. We'll stop after those 2 because I do want to have workshop time. So we'll take the 2 questions and then we'll wrap up this part and we'll go into kind of the open discussion afterwards and conclude. Yes, first question is here.
It's a very complex thing to put together. I'm listening to people, some people are here, some of them. Are there any people who are advocates that you can go to and say, I need help and assistance in putting this whole package together?
Sure.
Overwhelming for many people that just have this list with all different levels of computer literacy.
Sure.
Are there people that do that?
So the question, so everyone understands, was this is a comprehensive process. There's a lot of people that need help. There are advocates out there that can help you through the process. The answer is absolutely there are. That's why we brought this team together here tonight, was to bring these resources to you. And Brian might be the best person to start with. Is your nonprofit someone that can really help pull some of these pieces together for people?
I think we can. I think we need to be educated ourselves with the Commonwealth's process, but we learn quickly.
So the answer to that is we will continue to build our partnership with the Elevated Studio to be advocates on behalf of those that require assistance. And then the last question was back there. Question? Yep.
I'm just going to, my name is Cindy Rice, I'm from Grant Rock, and I had more questions regarding the seawall.
Okay.
And building and
Great.
uncertainty mitigation.
Okay.
And Foster Ave seems to have that hook.
Sure.
That's what I'm hoping we'll get in Grant Rock.
Okay, great. So we had a question on seawalls that will be addressed to the town later. So first of all, I want to really thank the experts here in the room tonight. Thank you so much for taking your time. Second, I want to thank everybody that came. This is way more people than I thought, so thank you so much for coming. We're doing another one on Cape Cod, April 11th from 6 to 8. There's information on our website for that one. We're planning to do at least 2 more, one in Quincy and one on the North Shore, so if you know people up there, tell them to come. These experts, most of them will be at all of them. There are resource tables in the back. If they're not manned by somebody there, there's information. Please go ahead and take some and take it home, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.